Hmm. Well, aloha. Seems like everything is working appropriately and properly. No, anyway, let's go where I left off for y'all. Hmm. Yep. We went through Bob Ross and Kowalski's along with Alexander and his. Okay, yep. Second break, we can resume completely random accidents. Yes. Then we talk about Bell Alexander's part life and his adventure, and then later issues with Kowalski's and Ross. Luke. Bill Branch Love. And we went through here since Tyrant, Ross was Tyrant. We went through the sump. Bob also started to dream bigger. Yes, he also pursued another interim. Okay. Alright, now we're around here. Now where shall I leave off at this? Alright, I just reread this paragraph and then go from there. Bob, by no means driven by money, as everyone who knew him strongly attests, but the new profound financial freedom did afford him the luxury to lead his life how he wanted. He returned his roots in the Orlando area, where he pursued various hobbies and were mind mash of his Florida heritage and his artistic achievements. He devoted untold amounts of time and money to rehabilitating injured creatures. He collected Victorian opalescent glass, and he toured through the streets in his silver 1969 Corvette with his vanity Bob Ross. Nice display. Part of his lifestyle love affair with hot rods. Bob also started to dream bigger. He pondered ways to use his fame to launch new ventures, to reach new levels of stardom from which he could leave a positive impact on the world. By the early 1990s, he was working out the details of children's TV show he intended to call Bob's World, which would be, as the New York Times explained it, a wilderness version of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Wilderness, or wilderness, wilder, wilderness. Okay, well, this is what pretty much explained. A wilderness version of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He also pursued another intriguing opportunity in Branson, Missouri, a tourist mecca. Oh, okay. Branson, Missouri, a tourist mecca that was akin to the Las Vegas of the South at the time. Bob teamed up with an Indiana family that was about to break ground on the theater there, and they began developing a stage version of Joy of Painting to accompany their Civil War musical. Not everyone was excited by Bob's new ventures, even as his fame reached new heights. The partnership that he made it all possible, the Rosses and the Kowalskis began to crumble and then utterly collapse to its morphed into a fight for control of Bob's name and likeness. The downward treachery appears to have started in 1992 when Bob's second wife died of cancer. As a result of the company's structure, her stock was divided equally among the surviving three partners. Thus, after her death, Bob only owned one-third of the company that bore his name, a situation that could not have sat well with a man who was used to be in charge. Who was used to be in charge. Used to be in charge. Alright.
There were other issues that added to the growing stains, such as Bob's sometimes messy personal life. From the earliest days, he had issues with fidelity. Like his father before him, he had fathered a child as an unmarried teen, and his first marriage was fallen apart over affairs. He was also said to have squeezed his various places over the years, as did many traveling artist.
Ah. Well, it's a bit challenging.
As did many traveling TV artists of the time.
Regardless, the news spark that led to the final conflagration with the Kowalskis was Bob's declining health. Although he was as tough as they come, his health has been a chronic issue. So much so, for years he'd been convinced he died early. He had a heart attack in the mid-1980s, and in early 1994, he faced his second and final battle with cancer. Alright. Bob.
Right after Bob learned about his lymphoma and his grand prognosis, and only a handful of days before his final Joy of Painting episode aired, he received a fax from Walt that was, for all intents and purposes, a declaration of war. It was a 6-page contract full of litigation and posturing, all with a single purpose: complete and total ownership over Bob Ross, his likeness, his name, and anything and everything he had ever touched or created forever.
Alright, let me go on with more with this voice, so practice. In other words, if Bob signed the contract, Bob Inc. would retroactively own much of he have created throughout his entire life, and be able to use his name to sell any products in the future. Walt was not suggesting to sign over all these rights for free. In exchange, he offering the whopping sum of 1% of revenues to him or his heirs, and for the next decade, it was a audacious ask, a brazen attempt to push Bob to do something he was likely never going to do. Needless to say, as his days dwindled, Bob did not sign that or any other contract with Bob Ross Inc. According to Steve, there were, however, countless phone calls between Bob and Walt as they argued and fought over the company's future. And as Bob became sicker and sicker, Steve recalls many a time wherein Bob would slam the phone into the receiver before emerging from another room screaming hot, mad, ranting, and how the Kowalskis wanted to own his name and everything associated with it. Again, Joan told a different version, even though she admitted she was quite young at the time and fairly junior at the company, so may not have been in the loop. I remember no intention whatsoever, she told the Daily Beast. As 1995 dawned, Bob's treachery was steadily downward. Even though as he fought the advancing cancer, he set other plans in motion to thwart the Kowalskis. He made a bizarre blizzard of last-minute changes to his will, most notably inserting a clause specifically addressing his name, likeness, and the rest of his intellectual property. All those rights were to go to Steve and one of Bob's half-brothers. Those weren't the only changes to Bob's will, whereas the year before, Anata had been in direct line to administer his estate. Now she was nowhere to be seen. Instead, Bob's third wife, whom he married only 2 months before he died, came to occupy a prominent place in the estate. The end came swiftly and slowly at the same time, as it so often does for cancer patients. Bob's lost his heir, his defining feature for many years, and rapidly shed weight. Steve returned.
Steve returned to a helped out just as Bob had returned to Florida to take care of his mom when she was dying. He believed in God, Steve explained to the Daily Beast, but he did not believe in what God was being used for by the priests. Steve inherited by his father's faith, a theology based outside of formal religion of all of its structures, a faith based in the natural world and his myriad wonders. God is only inside everything, including us, he said. We are a part of God, and the vibration of God is within us. On July 4th, 1995, Bob Ross felt that vibration as he became part of his God. The funeral was small. Around 25 of Bob's closest friends and family members of Woodland Cemetery, a vast contract of rolling lands in the suburbs west of Orlando. After paying their respects in the chapel, the funeral party made its way to the gravesite where they entombed Bob's gleaming aluminum coffin beside his mother and father.
The coffin may have been a Rolls Royce of burial devices, but the tombstone was anything but. It was a small, flat, and generously inconspicuous. On it were a logo of Bob's frizzy-headed, smiley vintage was known around the world, his name, birth date, death dates, and only two tiny words to sum up everything about his incredible life. Television artist. There was one conspicuous absence at the service that registered an odd even for those who didn't know anything about Bob's business. His long-standing business partners, or the anonymity between them over the last year, in particular the last few months. None of the Kowalskis attended the funeral. Not Annetta, not Walt, and not Joan. They did, however, send flowers. And in a few short months, they also send lawsuits. Part 2. With friends like these. Yeah.
Are you shitting me?
Robert Warren was seeing red, and it wasn't the Larson crimson paint on his platte. It was July 4th, 1995, and he recalled the Daily Beast. A hotel manager interrupted his class and passed over a phone for an urgent call. Are you shitting me? He repeated, as rage overtook his initial shock.
According to Robert, Danish Cap, the head of the paint manufacturer Martin F. Weber was Martin F. Weber was the other end of the line, and he had just passed along the terrible news of Bob Ross's death, but that wasn't the real reason for the call. Dennis had a problem with his hands.
Over the past number of years, Bob Ross products has become a dominant force on his balance sheets. With Bob gone only a few hours, Dennis had a question for Robert, who was friends with Bob Ross and Bill Alexander, as well as one of the best-known TV artists of the time. Dennis wanted to know if Robert would be willing to take over Bob's TV show, in effect, to become the front man for the Martin F. Weber Art Supply Company. Are you shitting me? He said once again, far louder, as a few dozen students looked on with wide eyes. Bob Ross just dies, and you're asking me to do this? I can't even talk about this right now. He slammed down the phone on the receiver, his answer a clear and resounding no.
Danish wasn't the only one pondering the future of the business. With Bob's death, Kowalski's now owned Bob Ross Inc. outright, but the company was at a crossroads. Its figurehead, the man on whose back the whole enterprise was built, was gone, and that's when Walt had to figure out what to do now.
Alright. Yeah, there's something up with.
Ultimately, they decided to embark on an aggressive, religious path forward. What the Kowalskis could get from Bob while he was alive through convincing or cajoling that the contract they had tried to get him to sign, they were now going to try to take by brute legal force. It didn't matter if it was his estate, his heirs, or anyone with even a passing interest in Bob Ross. All were about to be put on notice that Bob Ross Inc. played hard and played to win. Yeah, I'm actually losing that. Yeah. One of the Bob's close friends. Close. One of Bob's close friends, John Tam, sincerely took to calling her maximalist approach Grand Theft Bob, an effort to take what he and others did not believe belonged to them. Efforts to reach Walt and Annetta directly for comment were not successful, and Joan declined to arrange an interview or pass along written questions about his business and personal decisions that they made through the years, especially regarding their actions following Bob's death. After his lymphoma returned, and as Walt and Annetta's efforts to pressure him to sign over his rights intensified, Bob had worked proactively to ensure that Bob Ross Inc. didn't wind up with any of his intellectual property beyond what he had already been transferred to the company. That was particularly true when it came to his name and likeness, which were obviously reasons was a bit more personal than some of the items the company clearly did own, like the copyrights to instructional artist books or trademark cartoons of Bob on paint products. In his final months, Bob altered his will to specifically address these issues. Most notably was the final amendment he had made a mere 2 months before his death that caused specifically that Bob's name, likeness, voice, and visual, written or otherwise recorded work would go to his son Steve and his half-brother Jimmy Cox. And if those two so chose, the amendment also said they could deny the exploitation and such rights by anyone else, in a strange twist that would only come. Maybe that's how I can keep the voice calm. That would only come to light more than 20 years later. Steve was left unaware of the final amendment since his uncle Jimmy, the executor of the estate, had not shared the details. Any changes that he made in his trust, he did not because he felt he was doing the best thing for his family. One of the state attorneys effectively told the Daily Beast he was absolutely competent at the time. He was absolutely competent at the time. There was no question about his ability to make changes that he did. When he did. Oh god, this voice is killing me. When he did, and his reasons was as solid as it could be. That reason had apparently led Bob to an inescapable conclusion. He didn't want Bob Ross Inc. or the Kowalskis to own anything more than the limited intellectual property around art products that he had already signed over as part of the regular course of their art businesses. Although John believes Bob truly wanted his legacy to rest in the hands of his son, he also thinks that was another reason for the last-minute changes to the will. Vindictiveness on Bob's part, revenge against the Kowalski for what they have put him through his final year, for what some saw as their efforts to stymie Bob's new ventures like the children's TV show, for their desire, above all else, to keep him forever chained to the corporate husk of Bob Ross Inc., of which they now owned 100%. The Kowalski's first target was Bob's estate. When Bob died, he was worth around $1.3 million, with a half of that compromised with his 1/3 ownership of Bob Ross Inc. Aside from cash and stock, there was also physical properties to be divided, and then there was the matter of Bob's actual artwork and art supplies. Oh god, I sound like some 1800 Southerner plantation person. Oh well. Kowalski's first target was Bob estate. When Bob died, he was worth around $1.3 million, with a half of the compromise of 1/3 ownership of Bob Ross Inc. Aside from cash and stock, there was also physical properties to be divided, and then there was a matter of Bob's actual artwork and art supplies. Okay, that's good. Man, sorry.
Here's the Guanxis pound through their lawyers, and Etta and Walt demanded that Bob's widow, Linda, and the estate turn over what they considered to be their property. And that's pretty much where I left off because, man, the voice is actually killing me. Other than that, aloha.